Graniola. This is the Graniola channel, and I'd like to tell you a folk tale. This is the story of the underwater girl. I believe that listening to short, popular, retold stories is an excellent way to begin to understand a culture that's not your own. This story comes from one of the countries that has the highest suicide rate in the world. There was a young woman who lived near the big water where it got very cold. Her parents had died when she was a teenager, and she lived all by herself with only one house anywhere nearby. Maybe the couple that lived in that house had been friends of her parents, but she couldn't remember ever having been introduced to them. Sometimes she saw them knocking the snow off of their windows, but they never waved or came near her, and so she was surprised when one day a young man came to her door and told her that he was staying with his aunt and uncle. The girl's mother and father had worked hard to build and maintain the little house that she lived in now, and they had taught her to do the same. The young man seemed to enjoy spending time in her house, which wasn't too surprising as there wasn't much else to do in the neighborhood. I don't know if they were in love with each other, but after a short time had passed, they had decided to get married. And after they got married, the girl became pregnant. This made her very happy, and she was looking forward to the day when her baby would be born. Unfortunately, the happier she seemed to grow, the more bad-tempered her husband became. He bossed her around and talked to her in a mean tone of voice, and as they had lots of frozen fish around, he'd often whack her in the head with one of the fish. One day the girl thought to herself, if his aunt and uncle live in that house nearby, they're my family too. Now that I'm married to him, I'm going to go ask for their help. The snow was deep and the wind was howling. As she approached the house, she saw that the shutters were being closed. She knocked on the door politely at first, and then, desperate, started banging and begged them to open the door and speak to her. No answer at all came, and there seemed to be no movement inside the house. As it was freezing cold, in desperation, she turned to go back to her own little house. When she entered, she realized that her husband's mood was, if possible, even worse than it had been when she had left. That night she couldn't sleep at all, and she cried quietly until her eyes were red and burning. At dawn, while her husband was sleeping, she left the house. She walked straight out and into the big water. Her soaking wet clothes pulled her down to the bottom of the sea. She didn't resist at all, but just looked around with a sense of wonder. She had expected to drown, and yet she felt curiously still alive. She felt altered in a very agreeable way. Because she was an industrious person, she started looking for pieces of coral and rocks and seaweed to fashion a shelter, right where she was, under the sea. Because she was busy, the time passed quickly, and after a few short weeks, her baby was born. If you've ever heard the expression, "the child had a face that only a mother could love," then you're on your way to understanding what this little girl looked like. Her eyes were two jellyfish, her lips were made of a mussel, and her hair was a mess of seaweed. After the initial shock, the young woman grew to love her child. For several years they lived happily in deep waters. But, as inevitably happens, the child, as she grew, began to be interested in the world that was away from where they lived. She wanted to visit what was above the surface of the water. The older woman, to begin with, just laughed at the girl's request, but as the child badgered her, she started to get irritable about the whole question. One day, exasperated because it seemed like there was nothing else that they could talk about when they were together, finally she demurred. My conditions are these. As soon as you've put your feet on the firm earth, you go to the first house you see and knock on the door. Inform the man there that you are his daughter. After that, go to the second house and tell them that you are the child that was born to their nephew's wife after they shut their shutters and their doors when she went to them needing help and protection from her brutal husband. As you are telling them that story, I want you to flail your arms and to look as angry as you can. The first house was quite empty, her father having disappeared long ago. The girl saw the other house in the distance and began walking toward it. She remembered her mother's instructions, and she was a very good actress. So the scene that followed was exactly what the mother had hoped it would be, as she had anticipated, either because of the shock of seeing this creature who was related to them, or the effect of having to confront their own past cruelty. Their emotions were impossible to bear, and both of them died instantly. This tale is told in Greenland, which is the largest island in the world. Most of the land there is permanently covered in ice and is obviously terribly cold. This, no doubt, contributes to it being one of the least populated areas on Earth.